Hi, everybody. This is about, I think, between the districts that we represent, my fifth reclassification conversation in the last 3 months, so 2 months. I'm bringing that up because it is a real concern, I think, everywhere right now. I think that enrollment seems to be going up, the work seems to be going up, but the level of staff that we have does not go up. And so I think there's a real sense in all of the campuses that I represent, and in really all of the unions, that there's just more work than people can complete. And I think when there's a lot of work, we start to get into this world of, is the work that I'm doing the proper work for my classification? And so that's when we get into these kind of different things that I'm going to talk about. Basically, the two main things I'm going to talk about today are reclassification and out of class. And I want to talk about both, even though this is a reclassification training, because I think they both kind of go together. And I think that they are two different things that kind of are the result of the shift of work. What is this that's happening? Oh, I'm the co-host now. All right, great, thanks. Um, is this shift of work and more work, and what does that mean for everybody? So the first thing I really want to address is just, I think one thing that really impacts a lot of people is that when people have more work, a lot of times people immediately think, oh, I have more work, I should be reclassed. More work doesn't necessarily equal a reclass or an out of class, because when we're looking at out of class and reclass, we're in no way looking at how much work you have to perform. And unfortunately, more work doesn't necessarily mean that it's more pay, because when we're looking at reclass and out of class, what the only focus for both of those is if the work is from a higher classification. Or for a reclass, it could just be your job is completely changed and you're not going to get more pay, but it's not really what people are looking for. Most of the time when people are looking for a reclass, they're looking for a reclass into a position that's a higher level. And so that's usually when we are filing reclasses or out of classes, it's because we think that we're performing work from a higher level. And it's, again, not more work. It might be more work, but again, more work doesn't always equal more pay. And so I think that's one thing to think about, particularly in what we were talking about when I first started this conversation about everyone is feeling overwhelmed and like there's a lot of work. It doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do for those people. There are things that we can do, and we do it. We have meetings where we sit down and we organize people's work. We sit with their supervisor and we have them organize the work so that people are really clear. If you have more work than you can perform in you guys have 8-hour days here, I think. In an 8-hour day, we can sit down and we can organize that work so everyone understands this is what I should do first. And at the end of the day, maybe you don't have time for those other items that are left, and that's okay because they're not on your priority list. One good reason that we do that is we want to make sure that people are protected, and that in your performance evaluation or your discipline, you're not getting disciplined for items that we were told aren't a priority, and therefore you really haven't been completing them because you don't have enough time to get to them. So I talk about that first because that's really the most important thing, is to, really analyze when you're thinking about a reclass or an out of class, is this work from a higher classification, or is this just more work that actually fits into my classification? I think Scott in his email put out, thanks for those resources, Scott, put out a link to different classifications. You did, right?
I can check if I made the ACE
I think
classification.
you did, but that's a really good place to start, because through all of this, you're going to want to look at your own classification first, and then you're going to want to look at other classifications that you think might be those classifications that encompass the work if it doesn't already exist in your classification. And so now let me kind of talk a little bit about the difference between out of class and reclass. A reclassification, and if anybody wants to ask me questions through this, you can just throw up your hand and I can answer questions as well. If not, I'm just going to kind of keep plowing through all of this. But I'm happy to stop and answer questions as we go as well, if you think it's something that applies to what I'm talking about right now. Out of class is really when you are doing work for out of class work is work from a higher classification that you're doing for a temporary period of time. And so what we have is full out of classes, where sometimes they'll come to you and say, hey, we have this vacant position. Will you come and fill in this position? And obviously you would then make all of the money from that higher classification. That's usually more cut and dry. And usually it's something that you don't usually just accidentally end up doing an entire job without really knowing it, right? The other thing is that's more a progressive thing is what they sometimes call additional duties. And that's when you're doing some of the work of the higher classification, but not really all of the work of the higher classification. And that kind of becomes important when thinking about reclassifications as well, because when you're requesting a reclassification, it's really because your job has changed so much. It doesn't mean you don't do any of your old work, but it's changed so much that it actually warrants being reclassified into a totally different classification. Traditionally, a higher classification is where you would go to. Um, Even more basic, if everyone doesn't understand, we look at lower and higher classifications. We're not saying that one is more important than the other or one is harder than the other. It's just where people are paid. So when we're looking at how people are paid, you're paid based on the market rate. So what in the market are people looking at in these, in your work? How is it paid based on how are other people paid in the market? And the market that we look at for you all is the Bay Area 10 traditionally. Sometimes we will bring in other community college districts when we're doing studies, but traditionally what they're looking at is the Bay Area 10. You guys tend to be on the higher end of the Bay Area 10. I don't know anymore, but you used to, at least the last time we did a study. And so I think that I'd say the only people that used to be above you would be West Valley Mission. And they tend to be on the top of everyone just on the way that they're funded. And anyway, we won't go down that whole road. But point being is when you look at what you're paid at the market rate. I understand this is a very personal thing. So everyone is thinking about, well, my work is really important and everybody's work is really important. And that's not what we're looking at here. We're really just looking at duties, who's performing what duties, and how is it paid within our own system, and then how is it paid within the system of the Bay Area 10 is traditionally what we're looking at when we're looking at these reclasses and out of class.
I
Yeah,
was going
Scott
to ask
has.
you a quick question, Anthony. So I do get that question about pay, and let's say the market rate for your skills changes. Can you submit a reclass that's solely focused on pay and reviewing that market rate?
Not usually. No.
Okay,
I don't think there would have to be something in the contract that says you're just looking for a salary study, which I guess you could ask them to perform, but we don't really have salary studies usually. We really just have provisions that deal with reclassifications.
okay,
Because most of the time, when we're asking for, and I'll get to that, but when you're asking for a reclass, you're traditionally asking to be reclassed within the classifications that already exist, and they're already paid at a certain rate. So if we were going to look for some kind of salary study, traditionally we would bargain that, excuse me, and then we would go and we would have a whole study done to look at our salaries in comparison to everyone else. It will
okay,
come into place in here, and I will talk about that as well. But traditionally, what we're looking at is working within our own system because that's traditionally where people are going to be reclassed. Doesn't mean that's always where people are reclassed, but I would say 95% of the time, people are reclassed to a classification within our current system.
correct. All right,
So
thank you.
does that answer the question?
Yep.
Okay. So um, I think everyone understands what out of class is. There's a totally different process. I bring that up because, and I don't, do you guys have a form, Scott? Do you know for out of class? Everybody's a little bit different, but there should be some kind of out of class form that exists
We
that
do. I put
says,
that in chat if you want to take a look at it, or
all
uh,
right, great.
we can go over it.
Yeah, well, let's see. What does yours look like? I mean, I can describe what it is, but essentially it'll be a form. You'll list out the duties that you do from that higher classification, and then you'll request to be paid for that. The easiest way to show that they're from a higher classification is they just live in that classification. They're not described in yours at all, and the description of them is in the higher classification. It's kind of the same as reclass. Again, the only difference is that with a reclass, your job has changed. It really has to be a big change in order to be reclassed. You really need to, usually I think the number that Hoff and Associates that we use traditionally for a lot of the analysis, they say at least has to change around 70% of your job needs to be from that higher class in order to warrant a reclass. And that's really, we're looking at through all of your work, this big change. And that's when we get into the reclass. So if people have questions about out of class, I would say, reach out to us. We can help you fill out the form. If you feel like there are some of these changes have happened to your work and you're not sure if it's full or not, through all of this, reach out to us. We can answer those questions. I've gone through this with a lot of people individually over the last several months. So we're here to support you. This is just kind of an overall description of what this looks like. Um, let's really focus on the reclassification though, which is what we're here for, which is, okay, so you think your job has morphed into this totally different classification. The first step is to go through the classifications, unless you already know automatically, and say, hey, this is the one that I think is closest to my job description that would be this reclass, and that would what would be warranted. So what are some of the classifications we have here? Let's say you have
We have like admin one, admin two, and admin senior, I think.
sure, that's an easy one then. Admin one and admin two. Let's say you're an admin one. You think you should be an admin two. So I would say the first thing to do is you pull up your job description and look through it and pull out the work that you think you are doing right now that doesn't fit into that at all. Because if it fits into your job description, that's really not what we want to focus on. Because, and there will be overlap, especially between something like this is a good one to bring up because something like admin one and admin two, there's probably going to be a lot of overlap. And what you want to do is look at those two job descriptions after you've looked through yours and decide what doesn't fit into your job description. Look at the two job descriptions and then figure out between the two of them what's different. So again, there's going to be overlap, even between things like, you know, an admin assistant and an office assistant, or an admin assistant and an admin specialist, or an analyst position. Any of those positions are going to have some overlap. And that's not what we care about. What we care about is those defining features of the higher level classification. And those are the ones that you need to make sure you fit into each one of them, almost, at least the vast majority of them, in order to get that reclass. So what I tell people to do is this. If you think that you should be reclassified, the first step is to, and I know there's forms you have to fill out before you do any of that. I think these are the most important steps in order to put your best foot forward, is you pull out the job duties from the higher classification that you think you are performing. And then underneath each one of them, I just put it in a Word document. I've done this with people before. You just list out what you do every single day that fits into each one of those duties from the higher classification. And then after you do that, you look at it and say, what percentage of your day is filled with those duties? Because no matter what your form looks like, I know that it's going to have those questions on there because those are the most important questions through any reclassification. And so the first step I always say is to do that comparison, figure out what in your job description doesn't, or what you're doing now doesn't fit into your current job description, and then list out those duties and really under each one lay out exactly what you're doing and the percentage of your day that is filled with. And if you look at that and you add up the percentages and you don't think it's really a very big percentage, again, I don't know that there's nothing we can do. It might be more of an out of class. That would be when you reach out to us and say, hey, this is what I've done. This is what it looks like. What do you think I should do? Do you think this is a full reclass? And even if we think or not, you can still file a reclass. But the most successful ones are the ones where they look through and they write them out and you see that, oh, wow, there's a large part of my job that really should be in this higher level. The other thing to look for in these, and Janie, you have a question, so I'll stop there. Go ahead.
Well, I don't want to interrupt your flow. Are you sure?
All right, go for it. Yeah.
All right. So program coordinator 1 and 2. One of the biggest just like task distinctions, because they're very, very, very similar, is like reporting to the state. So let's say you start to do that role, like you offer, you say, I want to take this on, give me more reporting and things like that. And then you apply for reclassification. Can they decide, sorry, we don't want to reclassify your role, so we're going to take that like distinguishing task away instead? Or once they give it to you, are you kind of in?
15.1.3 of your contract says supervising managers shall not change duties arbitrarily or capriciously while a reclassification request is pending. So no, they can't. But I think that the thing to remember though too is the other piece with reclassifications, and you brought up a couple good points, and one of them I was going to move to next, so it was a perfect transition. But you know, I mean, I think that for this kind of thing, they can't just move them away, but you also need to have done them for a certain amount of time. So you don't want to file, if you've been doing this duty for like 2 weeks, you don't want to file a reclass because that's not a permanent and ongoing piece of your job. Usually it's at least 6 months to a year is the amount of time that you want to do these duties in order for them to become a permanent part of your job, in order for you to ask for a reclassification. So yeah, if one thing has changed, they can't just pull it away if that's the defining duty that would be the reclass. But if you've only been doing it for 3 weeks, they might have an argument to say, hey, this was just out of class. We had them do it for a little time, and they can take out of class away because, yeah, it's only for a certain amount of time. Um, I think the other big piece to think about, is with reclassifications is, especially with what you're talking, sometimes it's not just about the duties. The other big important piece that we want to think about through all of this is the level of supervision that you have. And I think with Scott talking, especially with those ones that are kind of transitions between the same classification, but higher levels within the same classification, a lot of times what happens then is what they're looking at is level of supervision, right? Like how much control do you have over your own work? Is there a supervisor that's coming in every day and telling you what you have to do? Or do you really just control everything? Do you make all of the decisions? Do you have really autonomy over your work to make those decisions? And so when we see a job description, which I think is kind of what you're talking about, Janie, where there's like maybe one or two job duties are different, there's always a little blurb at the top that talks about, oh, well, this is, if it's one of those where it's 1, 2, and 3 or a senior, it will usually say at the top the defining feature between those two things. And a lot of the time it's the level of the work, however you decide that. That's not what I always look at as much. But also the more important part is how much control do you have over your work? How much decision-making power do you have over your work? And really, is there somebody that's coming in and telling you what to do each day? Or are you just deciding what you do? A lot of the times we see these with like coordinator positions, analyst positions. Those types of positions tend to control their own work and their day. And that can be a big factor in what we look at when we're looking for a reclassification. A lot more important, and I know this will probably be on the form too, but sometimes it'll say about, the level of degree that you have. I don't find that those types of things ever make a difference in this. It's very rare that you would have to have a certain degree to move into a different job. If anything, that might just say, well, you don't have the degree, but you're already doing all of the work. So you might get an exemption around that. I just don't think, sometimes people will focus on those more minor pieces and they really never make a difference. They're on there, they ask you, most of the time it's just to make sure that you meet the minimum quals for that higher classification. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to change anything or be a big factor. The big factors are the work that you do and the level of supervision. Those are the two biggest things that usually equal a reclass through any of this. Janie.
Thank you. Two follow-up questions. One, if you're using supervision as a factor toward, why you want to argue for the reclassification, especially to go higher, would, it be a sound argument of the fact that you're working amongst, the people who are classified at a higher level than you and essentially being supervised in the same way as them? And then the second question was, if there are duties that aren't being met, from my previous question, would, I guess, a
Let's take the first
recommendation?
one. Let me take the
Okay.
first one first. So the first question is, do you want to, here's the thing. If you can show, if somebody's already doing a job, and that means supervision and everything, and it's a job that you think you should be reclassed to, that is all good evidence for you to show why you should get the reclass, right? So yeah, if the level of supervision is the same as somebody else, you want to use as much evidence as possible to show that you are doing this higher level job. If somebody's already performing the job and you do all of the same work and you have the same level of supervision, then that's great. That checks off all the boxes. Through this whole process, all I'm trying to teach you what to do is to put your best foot forward. And the way you do that is to make this process as easy as possible for the people that are reviewing it, because they're lazy. And I'm not saying that like they're lazy, they don't do their job. I'm just saying, like, they have a lot to do a lot of times, especially people in the HR departments and all of those things. If you can present to them everything that they need and they just have to check down boxes and go check, 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 you're going to be a lot further along in this than somebody who hasn't done the upfront work and they're having to pull a bunch of stuff out of you, and they don't want to do that. They want to just, I mean, it's their job. I get it. But again, they're going to take the path of least resistance. And if you can really show them as much as possible that you do that work through any evidence that you have, even if it being drawing a comparison to another employee that's doing that work and that job, and you can show, hey, I have all of the same as them. To me, that's the best thing that you can do.
Yeah.
Did that answer them?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
So then my other question then is there either a part of the process or an etiquette involved when it comes to like how many times you apply for reclassification? Like if you get rejected, is there a wait time after, like before you can do it again?
There usually is. Do you know what the wait time is here, Scott, or if there is one?
The wait time for submitting for a reclass or
No,
after?
after you've submitted one, how long do you have to wait? I think it's usually 2 years is generally what it is, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, yeah, our blockout window, as far as if you submit one and you submit one poorly, I think even if you get a successful one, it's still 2 years. So you can only do this process once every 2 years, which is why you want to make sure your first submission is as best as possible. Yeah, and then as far as the timeline for it actually taking place, I think that staffing is being worked on. Because in our contract, it's something like 45 days, but the form and the decision is retroactive back to the date you submitted the form. And some of this can be seen as an incentive to file it as soon as possible. But again, as you're hearing from Anthony, that may not be the best decision. You may want to wait until you know that these duties are permanent and ongoing, and you have more evidence to support your reclass, and that you're ticking all of those boxes and taking your time with it.
The classification specialist has 30 days talking about the process. They're supposed to have 30 days. I mean, here's the thing, like Scott said, it's retro. And I'll just go back to the more you push them, the faster they're going to go through it. And you may not get the analysis that you want out of them. I mean, I'm not saying we should let them go 6 or 7 months, but I think giving them extra time is something I always encourage people to do, because this is the person who's doing the analysis, and you really want, I mean, if you can get done at that first step, you're done, which is much better than having to wait for the whole process to go through, because I know there's a timeline for the independent consultants as well, but they don't always do it in the time that they're supposed to do it either. So I think there is a benefit to you to be a little flexible on the time, considering that it's going to go back to the date you submitted it as far as your salary is concerned. So, I think there is benefit in letting them do their job and giving them the time they need to do it. Fong.
So I have a questions regarding to if our district doesn't have the classifications that we want to apply to, but other community colleges has a job descriptions due to the nature of our work, and they have established like, a higher classification or or whatever that might be. Can we use it to kind of create potentially a new classification at our district?
Yes, and that's kind of what I was referring to in the beginning. So thanks for bringing it up again. Usually they want you to work within the system that we have. Does that mean that's always what's going to happen? No, because sometimes the system that we have doesn't encompass the work that you're performing. And so, yes, that's when they would create a new classification. If you can direct them to a classification somewhere else that you think is helpful in this process, I would say attach it. There's nothing that says that you can't, at least from what I saw. So I would say, yeah, attach it. I think that the other thing to think about with that is then when we bring in a new classification, that's when we do what we'll do is if it gets approved, and yes, they decide, okay, we need a new classification, we don't have a job that encompasses all of this work, then what happens is the union steps in at the end and they say, I want to demand to bargain the impacts of this change in working conditions. It's a new classification. The impact would be the salary. And that's when we go into the whole salary discussion and figuring out what that would be paid. But yeah, that's that process and what it looks like. Excuse me, it's always a little more difficult than if you can find something within. But if there really is nothing within, then I would say, yeah, find something outside. I would go to West Valley Mission first because they're the highest paid, and try to find something that they have in the Bay Area 10. And if you can't find anything, I mean, at the end of the day, if you can't find anything anywhere, you just say, hey, it doesn't fit into any description. I leave it up to you guys to figure out where this work fits and what job we need to create. So those are kind of your options around, yeah, either in our system, find something somewhere else, or just put it through without a job description and say, I know this isn't belong in mine, so it's your job to figure out where it belongs.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions right now?
I don't see any other hands up. Thank you, Anthony.
Sure. I mean, that's kind of my general overview of what you should be doing as far as what we can do and put in the work to get our part done. Article 15 kind of goes over the actual process. I'll review that right now a little bit so that we're clear on what you need to do. There's things in here that I didn't even realize you needed to submit with a reclassification, because I've never, usually what you do is you just fill out a PDQ, which is that form that will have all of your job duties and things, and submit it. Your contract actually says you have to submit a copy of the present job description, a copy of the job description for the proposed classification, a completed copy of the PDQ, the classification questionnaire, which I think Scott sent a link out to already, a current and proposed organizational charts showing all positions. Where would you even get that? Do we have access to those, Scott?
So org charts actually don't exist at the district in many departments. So some people they create them on their own, or they submit it without that org chart component because they're not immediately accessible. But you do describe in the PDQ who you report to, who your contacts are, et cetera, and that kind of fills in the org chart. I will say, I think there was something that I forgot to say earlier, but successful reclasses as far as work, a lot of it, like networking with your colleagues who work at Foothill or in De Anza and even in central services, if you want to get a reclass, if you find someone who's doing the same job that you're doing and you're classified lower, talking to that person can be, and citing them in your reclass can be very helpful. Getting pay equity is normally just slam dunk for a reclass. So if the district has already made the determination that your work is classified, let's say at a program coordinator 2 at Foothill, and you're at De Anza doing that same work as a program coordinator 1, and you know that you do everything, or you've talked to that person, you know, that person could be very helpful as evidence that you should be paid higher.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. And I think that I would just maybe address it somewhere, just say I don't have access to it, just so that they don't say you didn't submit the proper paperwork. But yeah, I mean, to me, that's kind of their job. I mean, they should have org charts if they want them. I don't know why we would be responsible for that. And we may want to take that out in the future when we're looking at our contract, because it just seems like an odd thing to request you to submit. But anyway, it's there. So we want to at least address it. And then then the last one is additional supporting documentation. And I think that's where it gets into kind of what you're talking about, Fong, which is if you can find something somewhere else, anything that you want to add, I would just add it and submit it. You know, they can use it. It doesn't say you can't use anything else. So, yeah, so that's what you need to include. The first step is you're going to submit all of that to the classification specialist. I think in the email that Scott sent out, I also saw the email that you need to send it to when you get the whole packet completed, and then CC Scott on it as well so that he can stay in the loop through this process. The classification specialist has 30 days that they will review it. Once you get their response, again, I said we might want to give them more time so that you can get a good, thorough response. You can then go up to the Vice Chancellor of Human Resources for an appeal. And then if they still deny it, you still get the chance to go out to an independent consultant. And I don't think we have any limit here. Some of the districts have a limit on how many can go out to an independent consultant each year. And some have a limit on how many reclassifications people can file. I did not see any limit here on the amount that we can do or how many we can go out to. The union splits the cost of that final appeal. And then at the end of that, that's it. So when you go through this process, and I will be honest, it's a great thing to have at the end because everybody doesn't have it, is to be able to go to that independent consultant and have them review everything and give their analysis is a really good step, because they're usually pretty impartial. You know, it doesn't benefit them to go with one side more than the other because we both choose them. So if somebody starts picking the district all the time and we start thinking this doesn't look very fair and there's some pretty obvious things that are wrong, we're not going to hire them anymore. So they do have a real interest in not being biased through this process, but just looking at it in a very factual way, which is what are the duties that they're performing and do they fit into their job or not? So that's the process. Again, at the end, the last thing it talks about is just the retroactivity. It goes back to the date that you submit it. So if you're thinking about this, just make sure you submit them whenever as soon as you can, because that's the date that's going to go back. I wouldn't rush through it. And if you want us to review it with you, if you want us to do any of that before, that's always helpful for people too. We have access to some of the analysis from COF in the past, and I have used that. We don't have every classification, but we do have analysis from them in the past that kind of highlights certain things that I've reviewed. So we can go through all of that with anyone who wants to. Just let us know, and we can do that initial review. And that's all I really have, other than questions. And
Sounds good. Thank you, Anthony. Yeah, if at any point you think we should stop recording, we can do that. I do want to, thank members. I hope that you recognize that as being a member, Anthony is someone you have the support of, because we provide that, and this is funded by members. So if you have any colleagues that are interested in this information, just make sure they join. I think this link was shared with a couple people who may not be members at the moment, but I do encourage you to join so that we can continue to fund these kinds of things. And you do have, as a member, that ability to make an appointment with Anthony, and we can do a one-on-one meeting to look at your PDQ after you've filled out that draft. So that's something that we've been doing, and Anthony has capacity to offer. So yeah, continue to support your union. Sharon, I see your hand up.
Hi, yeah, Anthony, can you tell us a little bit about so there was a classification study that I witnessed, and they submitted requesting let's say they were program coordinator 1, they submitted requesting program coordinator 2, but they
Okay.
actually got reclassed into something different. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
tell me what you mean. I tell you about it. You mean about what
Yeah.
happened with that process exactly?
Can you explain to us what, yeah, how that works? Can they reclassify you at a different classification than the one you
Got
are
it.
requesting?
Yeah, I mean, they can reclassify you into anything that they want, essentially. I mean, this goes into a bigger discussion about management's right of assignment and, and duties and how they're distributed. And they really do have that ultimate. I mean, they can take you, they even have a section, and this is really management's biggest right, which is the right of assignment of work. I mean, they even have a contract section, and this is in every contract everywhere, where they can move people based on the needs of the district into different classifications if they need to. Now, obviously, if it's a lower salary or something like that, there's other issues that we would have with that. But it kind of goes the same with this. What we're doing is we're letting them know what we think is the best classification that we think we fit into. But if they think there's something that's better, yeah, they have the kind of full reign to everything to decide. And maybe it'll be even higher than the one that you've submitted. Maybe it'll be the same. But yeah, ultimately that's their decision. Now, again, if you disagree with that decision, we have an ultimate appeal that goes out to an independent consultant, and the independent consultant would then look through everything and decide what they think is the right outcome, be it stay where you are, move to somewhere else, or stay in there. And it's binding, so everybody has to, the district and us both have to agree, excuse me, that's the last step, which we have in the contract. So yeah, just because you submit something that you think is the proper classification does not mean that that's where you're going to end up in the end.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Andrea.
Hi, Anthony. So what would you recommend if you are already in a position that is the senior level, but you feel that new duties have increased that you believe require more expertise or more knowledge that should be a higher range? What do you do if you're already at the senior range?
I mean, I would just submit, I mean, again, I would go back to if there's nothing that you think it fits into, file a reclass and see what they say. You just say there's nothing that encompasses this work, it's at a much higher level now. And have them do the analysis. Maybe they'll come back and say, well, this isn't out of class or whatever it is. I mean, if it sounds like it's not, is it enough work that would kind of encompass a totally different job, do you think? Or it's just the work that you're doing, you're saying is kind of now is more difficult in that there are different requirements for it?
Kind of both. So it's turned into, it's definitely been an increase of in work, but it's a different level. And I'm not the only one. There's, someone else in the office, but we feel like the level of work and knowledge or expertise that's expected of us to do this work is something. I mean, I'm starting to feel like I should be a lawyer, like an immigration attorney,
Yeah,
because you
right.
have to keep up with so much legal information in order to do my job properly. And I just feel like it's something new. I would say in the last maybe year and a half, it's really kind of shot up. But I just feel like this is something they're expecting, something that I feel is beyond what my current position job description is reflecting.
Yeah, I would say file a reclass, but where it says at the top, what classification do you think you should be reclassed into? I would just leave it blank and say, no comparable classifications, maybe something like that. Highlight in your reclassification request, really highlight what you're telling me right now. Focus on those duties that have changed and have morphed into this higher level, or at least, higher level of knowledge and analysis and everything else that is needed to do the job, and submit it and see what happens. Again, at the end of the day, you're going to go out to an independent consultant if the district says it's not, and we'll get some kind of final answer.
Yeah, and even if your reclass supports you moving into a different bargaining unit, like we've had people submit reclasses that come back and say perhaps that they belong in Teamsters, that they're doing more supervision or that type of work, or like director level work or anything else. Like ACE doesn't stand in the way of you moving up into those other units and other spaces that may have a job description that better encapsulates the work you do. So just so you know.
Yep.
Thank you both.
Sure. There's a couple questions, I think, in the chat. Thanks for covering all this. Is there a cover letter template for a reclass application? I think that's just it should be covered in the PDQ. There's lots of questions in there that describe. I mean, that's all really. Are you saying, like, is there like something that we've written up that says exactly what I'm saying right now? I'm not sure I know exactly what you're asking for. I mean, like the PDQ was just kind of all questions, so you'll know exactly what you need to fill it out. And then the process is laid out as far as what needs to be included is in the contract, but we can write something up that's just kind of a summary of what we're talking about right now, if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I don't think I saw the cover letter question. I mean, if you wanted to summarize like executive summaries, I love a good executive summary. It saves me a lot of time. And so like Anthony was pointing out, if you can save time for others, that could be helpful. But the most important thing is that position description questionnaire. I'm scrolling down because I think
Yeah,
something.
I don't think you need to write. I was wondering what to write in the email. I don't think you need to write anything in the email. You just need to make sure you provide everything that you need to provide. You don't need a cover letter. I mean, because what you're going to show is, essentially through all of the evidence that you provide, the form has a lot of questions. So you're going to have a lot of information. You're going to have to provide them there. And the form really should speak for itself. And if there is more evidence that's needed, you would just attach it to the email, like we were talking about before. If there's a description or something that you would have from another classification or another district, something like that you want to include, I would include it. But I don't know that you need to have like a cover letter or some kind of massive description in the email. You would just say, here's my reclassification request, essentially.
Yeah, this is more technical than it is poetry. So many things that I
Yeah.
submit, it just says see attached, and that's enough to get the job done. So you shouldn't have to, including too much information could be a hurdle for people. So I would only fill out, what's provided and then just make sure that it's the strongest argument and that it's accurate. So that's another thing, like we can help you and coach you through your PDQ, but you're the expert in your job because you do it day to day. Like, Andrea brought up international students. I have no idea what Andrea goes through on a daily basis. The classification is there, but that form is really what says, these are duties beyond the current classification. And that's the important thing to highlight, is those duties that go above and beyond where you're currently classified to either get working out of class or to get reclassified. And then to say you do those, often as a high percentage of your job with independence in discretion making. Another common thing I'll say is like, if something breaks, who do they go to? Like if something's not working, and if that's you and you're the person responsible for fixing it, that means you're in charge of it. So that would be important to point out, rather than, well, you know, I coordinate or I work collaboratively. Like, as great as team building is, classification is largely a individual, you know, just you're assigned these duties, you are individually assigned these, and we need to isolate that and say, like, you know, this is your job duty, and it's what you're responsible for, and those responsibilities are ultimately what supports you getting reclassified. I always feel good when I can make Anthony quiet. It means I said the right thing. So.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, I'm seeing, yeah, chat has slowed down substantially. I don't know, Anthony, if you're getting private messages or not. So as a part of this meeting, Anthony's email is there. You all have my number if you need to call me. We can schedule a meeting. I know some of you have scheduled one-on-one meetings with Anthony and I to, you know, review your draft. I think to make the best use of our time and what we provide, definitely if you could fill out a PDQ as much as possible and, you know, do so. And again, just highlight those duties that are beyond your classification, that you do a high percentage of the time. I think Anthony's suggestion of just isolating those things, like looking at the two descriptions, looking at the distinguishing characteristics or those that don't exist in the lower classification, and then writing down all the things that support that. I think that's very important. So if you could have a really, you know, good rough draft before you meet with the two of us, I think that's highly advantageous, because again, we don't know what you do on the day-to-day, and the more support you put behind it, you're going to be going to an observer who also doesn't know what you do daily. Like even these classification specialists, their expertise can sometimes be a little bit limited, or just what they're familiar with or what they deal with most often. So we just, you know, need to make things as clear as possible. But yeah, I would say if you're thinking of a reclass, just fill out that form and then schedule some time with us before submitting it. Again, if you submit it and you haven't consulted with us, I think your odds are a little bit less, but you know, I've seen people do well on their own, but I think largely people do better with our support. So yeah, thank you to Anthony for providing this. Anthony put his,
I put my cell in the chat. So
yeah.
if you don't, you know, I'm on the road some days. So if you don't get a response quickly, always feel free to text me and just say, hey, can we set some time to meet? Anything like that. I do try to get back to emails as quickly as possible. But sometimes text is a much quicker way to get me if I'm multiple days on the road. So just want to provide you with that as well.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. So, and I put my number in there as well, so you can do that. It looks like Anthony's reading something that he may want to respond to. So,
there's an education difference, an experience difference between coordinator 1 and 2. Program coordinator 1, 3 years of responsible experience. Program coordinator 2, 5 years of responsible experience. I read this as education and experience could also be included. Can you please clarify? I mean, that to me falls more into like the minimum qualifications for being hired into the job, which isn't necessarily going to, I believe, and without seeing them right in front of me, there are other differences between the program coordinator 1 and 2. And I think some of those differences are what we had talked about before, which is the level of supervision, the autonomy that you have over your work, you know, all of those different things. Those are the things you want to focus on more, because we don't really have stepping stones that just say, once you get to 5 years, you jump to 2. That's not something that we have set up in our system traditionally. So while I think that shows more into the minimum quals for the job, I don't know that that's going to equal a reclass for you. I would really look at the program coordinator 1 and 2, because I'm pretty sure there are differences there beyond the years of experience. And I think it goes more into the level, you know, of control that you have over the work that you perform each day, or how much supervision you have. So I would focus more on those for a reclass than how many years of experience you have. But if you want to add it in there, you could add it in there as well and just say, hey, I have 6 years of experience and this says you need 5. It may be helpful. But really for these, mostly what you're looking at is the things that we've already talked about.
Yeah, and then I'm looking somewhere. I had a table on PC1 versus PC2 because that's pretty common.
It is
Um,
one that comes up a lot, which is why I think I'm pretty sure there are differences in there around supervision levels and
yeah, some of it is the impact and having multiple programs. Let me see if I can find that, and I'll try to share it. Ah, maybe I do have it, and I just didn't read this the whole way, but I'll drop it in chat. I think I had it just a moment ago. All right. So again, I'll go ahead and stop recording. Thank you again.